between the cell membrane and the cell wall, basically saying if a cell is oriented like this, all of the hydrostatic pressure, the water pressure, the weight of the cell is going to be pressing on the bottom cell membrane and therefore the bottom cell wall. And that's how the plant is detecting which way is up and which way is down. It's asking itself the question, is there more force on the top or the bottom side of my cell? The plasma lemma central control hypothesis says that calcium channels open in responses to differential tensions at the plasma membrane. So again, there's some pressure on the plasma membrane because of the weight above it, and depending on which way the cell is laying, the pressure will be on the side or the top or the bottom of that cell. This differential tension at the plasma membrane will lead to an increase of calcium ions, which will bind to calmodulin and other protein kinases, and that there'll be a final response and an auxin release that will cause the differential elongation and the bending downward. Right? Anyway, this is sort of a fancy hypothesis, right, based on what we now know about hormone response pathways, calcium ions, calmodulin, so it kind of incorporates a lot of the other things that we've learned. I think they're probably all true. It probably just depends on which plant, what part of the plant. I mean, the fact that someone has a hypothesis means they found some evidence for it, or else it wouldn't have made it into our textbook. So I think some plants are using the starch statolith hypothesis, other ones are using hydrostatic pressure, others of the plasma lemma central control. Maybe the same plant is using all three of them. Okay? So it's not an either or. All right, hydrotropism is growth in response to differences in soil moisture. So plants are responding to water levels as well. And as you can imagine, roots are growing towards regions of greater water potential. Right, so this is mainly impacting the roots. We would probably say that roots are positively hydrotropic. Of course, they're absorbing water. They're going to go find that water. Now listen, this is really hard to study because roots are more positively gravitropic than they are positively hydrotropic. Roots are really keying in on the force of gravity. So it's hard to kind of tease out the separate effects of gravitropism and hydrotropism. Do you see that? How that could be a problem to tease out the separate effects. But there is a mutant P that we call agiotropum that is neither gravitropic nor phototropic. It's blind to both gravity and sunlight. And you know what? That thing is positively hydrotropic. It will respond to water, greater water potentials. Okay, so that's kind of how we know. You can factor out gravitropism. You can then look at those separate effects of hydrotropism. Yeah?
We've talked about a lot of different mutants. Are these found in nature or did we mutate them ourselves?
A lot of them we've mutated ourselves. Some of them may be found in nature, but we're not above mutating plants. Right?
So we found the genes for like hydrotropism or something?
Yeah. So we kind of, some of them are just some of these mutants are just random. A lot of times we can't selectively mutate. We just expose these things to mutagens and we just kind of see what happens. We take a lot of time to figure out what they can't do, and then a lot of times we'll go to the genes and look at what genes are messed up, and so we can correlate gene to function, right? So I don't know if this was selectively mutated or just sort of broad scale mutated. Some of these things, though, are found in nature, although you can imagine that a pea like this wouldn't do very well in nature, right? So you don't find too many of them in nature for a reason. All right, and just like gravitropism, moisture sensors are also found in the root cap. That's a really good place for a moisture sensor to be found, right? When it's the root that's positively hydrotropic, right there at the tip of the spear, right? That's a good place for it. And not surprisingly, calcium ions play a role in the induction of hydrotropism, all right? So this is another hormone response pathway that has calcium as a second messenger, so that's not surprising. Thigmotropism is growth in response to touch or in response to contact with a solid object. This has to do with a lot of clinging vines, tendrils perhaps. So tendrils, we already know, wrap around any object with which they come into contact. This enables that plant to climb and cling. And these things can wrap around one or more times in less than an hour. This is pretty fast as far as plant growth goes. You could stand there, if you had enough patience, right? You could stand there in an hour and watch a vine grow around one or more times in an hour. That's how fast it can be. Now, why does that happen? Well, here's the thing. The cells touching the solid object actually shorten, whereas the cells on the opposite side elongate. Now, this is kind of like phototropism on acid. See, in phototropism, it was just cells on the outside that elongated to bend. This is just an exaggerated bend and bend and bend 360. And that's because not only do the cells on the outside elongate, the cells on the inside shorten to get that really extreme bending. All right, and of course that would be under hormonal control as well. But we won't go into that hormonal response pathway. Okay, so those are the tropisms, right? These little plants, they can detect what's going on around them, and using these hormone response pathways, they can do something about it. Right, and what they normally do is they change their growth patterns in response to these external stimuli. All right, but look, there's more to this. It's even more amazing than that. I want to talk about circadian rhythms, and this is how plants are basically keeping time. Plants can keep time. All right, and they're keeping time as a way of being able to best respond to their environments. They have to be able to keep time, right, to be able to respond to their environments in the right way. So these things are kind of bound up together. Keeping time is part of their responding to stimuli. All right, so maybe you know some flowers are open in the morning and they close at dusk. Many flowers are open all the time, but some of them are only open in the daytime and then they close at night. There are lots of leaves in the world that will unfold in the sunlight and then fold back up at night. Did you know that? It's really amazing. On top of all that, photosynthesis, the production of auxins, the rate of cell division, all have regular daily rhythms. There are rhythms to a plant's life. And what's really amazing is that these rhythms will continue even when all environmental conditions are kept constant. That's very, very important. All right? So, under normal circumstances, the leaves will open in with the sunlight and close in the dark. But you know what? If you give that plant constant dim light, you don't give it access to the sun anymore, it will still open and close its leaves on a regular pattern. All right? There's something going on here. And so we call these things circadian rhythms. Regular, approximately 24-hour cycles. Now that approximately is very, very important. There are examples of circadian rhythms across the living world. In fact, biologists think that they're now universal, at least amongst the eukaryotes. But there have even been some circadian rhythms discovered in cyanobacteria. These regular, approximately 24-hour cycles in living things. Now, the question that researchers are asking is, are these rhythms really internal? I just gave you some simple evidence to suggest that yes, these are internal rhythms. Because if you cut off a plant's access to sunlight and give it constant dim light, it'll still open and close its flowers. It'll still open and close its leaves. So it seems like, and most researchers agree, that these rhythms are controlled internally, or these rhythms are what we would call endogenous. These are endogenous rhythms from within the plant. All right? And so this gets at that whole thing called the biological clock. Right? This internal mechanism, this internal timing mechanism, whatever it is what biologists call the biological clock. And we talk about that. your biological clock. You're gonna wake up every morning whether or not your alarm goes off, right, when you're in that pattern. Now, the pattern can be changed, and we'll see it can be changed in plants as well. But biological clocks are a real thing. Okay, now here's the deal. Under constant environmental conditions, the period of the circadian rhythm is free running. When I say period, I mean how often it repeats. It's free running. The natural period is anywhere between 21 to 27 hours. And you don't have to reset it at each cycle. This is when you cut off access to the external stimulus. It's free running, it keeps going, and you don't have to reset it. We would say that these circadian rhythms are they're self-sustained oscillators. So check this out. This is I don't know, this things that people come up with, right? Here's this little plant. This is the plant that'll close its leaves in the day and close its leaves at night, open them in the day. They've got this this must be a really, really light string here. And a really, really light little arm, but this arm pivots like this. And there's this very, very slowly revolving drum with a pen on it. So that when this, when this leaf closes, right, the pen comes down. And when then the leaf opens the next day, the pen goes back up. You see that, how that would happen? It's on that little pivot. And so check out this real life data here. Here are the days that this plant has been in continuously dim light. Open, close, open, close. It just keeps going without any access to the sun. It doesn't have to be reset each day. It's free running. It's a self-sustained oscillator. Now, here's the thing. It's not that the environment doesn't matter. The internal rhythm will keep going without the environment, but the environment helps to synchronize the circadian rhythm. All right, it's a synchronizing agent. The Germans say, we're talking about Germans before, that it's the Zeitgeber, or the Zeitgeber, the time giver. All right? And so the environment keeps that circadian rhythm in step with the 24-hour light-dark cycle. All right? The light-dark cycle is not exactly the same in Florida as it is in Canada. Right? So a plant has to kind of take that internal rhythm and adjust it to where it's found. In a similar way, the daylight cycle is not the same now as it will be in July. So do you see how, I told you this circadian rhythm is anywhere between 21 to 27 hours. It seems like a big range, but that's so the environment can kind of be a time giver, and it gives the plant a little bit of flexibility both seasonally and geographically. You see that? So this is very, very important. What if the circadian rhythm, the natural internal rhythm, was a little bit less, just a little bit less than 24 hours, or a little bit more than 24 hours? Do you see how every day the action of the plant, if it was greater than 24 hours, would get a little bit later, and a little bit later, and a little bit later each day? Right? And what if this was something like opening your leaves to be able to do photosynthesis? Well, eventually you're going to be opening your leaves in the dark. Now, eventually, you'd kind of cycle back around to being in the daytime, right? So this would be if the rhythm was only internal, without any time giving or synchronizing by the environment. So the environment helps to just perfectly synchronize that natural circadian rhythm to the environmental cues. Okay, so that's very, very important. Very, very important element of this. And so something like flowering, like I just said, which generally takes place in light, would occur at a different time each day, like I've already said. So the plant has to become resynchronized, all right? So plants do become resynchronized or entrained to the 24-hour day that they find themselves in. So here's a very important term, entrainment.